Hey guys, welcome to another episode of All Things Review. Today we're gonna look at Anora. I watched the movie. I quite enjoyed it. I didn't like how they reduced it to just a simple porn or escort movie. I thought it was deeper. The contents was a lot deeper uh than than before. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing the review. I thought this was the best review. So let's go.
Pretty Woman, the beloved rom-com classic,
So this was a comparison between Anora and Pretty Woman. So let's do the synopsis. Anora. So Anora is a stripper working in the strip club. It's Russian based. Anora is a Russian name. They didn't go a lot into the history of the family, her side of the family. So this breakdown comparing Pretty Woman to Anora, I thought it was quite comparable. I think it's a good review, and we'll just go from there. Yeah, and then in terms of the difference was that Anora wasn't really a love story, wasn't a fairy tale happily ever after. And I think this video does a good compare contrast. And also Anora was Russian based and they were younger. They were kids like early 20s, under 25, and then this movie were much grown. I think the lady was like 30, and then this guy was 45 as a banker, referring to Pretty Woman. So let's go into this review. I'll speed it up a bit. So let's get started.
was originally supposed
Again, follow this channel and fear review.
to be a way darker and grittier cautionary tale about class, work, and survival in Los Angeles. And back then, it was called 3000, named after the amount of money Vivian, the main female lead, who is a streetwalker, gets paid to spend a week with Edward, a wealthy corporate raider who basically hires her to be at his beck and call. But then Disney took over the project, and even though they were initially open to a darker tone, once Julia Roberts and Richard Gere were fully on board, the whole thing started to soften, slowly turning into the fairy tale romance it is known for today. But here's where Anora comes in. Released in 2024, it takes the same premise, worker getting pulled into the world of wealth and power by being hired to spend a week with the son of a Russian oligarch named Ivan for $15,000, cue inflation jokes, but instead of being a feel-good romance, it dives into the harsh realities Pretty Woman originally set out to explore. I know these two movies have been compared a lot, but I think it's a comparison worth exploring, especially when you look at Pretty Woman's original story. I like and enjoy both movies, so let's dive into how these stories tackle the world of work, how they portray their female leads and their motivations, and where they differ in their approach to love, power, and survival.
Avant, le temps des impôts, c'était long, longtemps. Maintenant, le temps des impôts, c'est un expert turbo-impôt qui répond à toutes vos questions.
Both Vivian and Annie possess tough exteriors, likely hardened by their line of work and perhaps their personal backgrounds. Not much is known about Annie, and the few details about her background which are provided in the script are omitted from the movie. According to director Sean Baker, Annie is ethnically Russian, though her real name, Anora, which isn't traditionally Russian, suggests a more complex heritage. Born in one of the post-Soviet countries, she could be of Central Asian descent. In fact, some media outlets initially labeled her as Uzbek American. In the script, Annie, who is 23, mentions that she has been in America since she was 3 years old. Her mother lives in Miami, while Annie, on the other hand, lives in Brighton Beach, a Russian-American neighborhood in Brooklyn, with her older sister Vera, who's 25. Annie's backstory hints at a childhood marked by the struggles of being the daughter of immigrant parents. She strongly identifies as American, which makes perfect sense given that she has spent nearly her entire life in the States. However, Annie deliberately distances herself from her Russian roots. This is one of the reasons she prefers to go by Annie instead of Anora.
It says Anora.
I know, but I go by Annie.
The name change also helps protect her.
Yeah. And that was a big thing. Annie's like the flirty stripper escort worker, and then Anora is her connection to Russia or ties back there. So I liked how the movie did that distinction between Annie and Anora. I thought that was pretty good. Um, my only curiosity is why they had the title as Anora instead of Annie. So I think they chose Anora just to say that this movie is more Russian based. So it wasn't Annie could be mistaken for like white. Um, forgot that show. Who was called Annie? There was a movie where this girl was called Annie. I forgot. It was a children's movie. So I guess Annie would differentiate Anora as a more mature tone and then emphasizing that it's Russian based.
Privacy and safety as a stripper, a job she's clearly been doing for quite some time given her skills. Additionally, Annie avoids speaking Russian unless she absolutely has to.
I can speak Russian. I just prefer not to.
This identity conflict is a key part of Annie's character, subtly appearing throughout the film in several important moments, but I'll come back to those moments later. Vivian's backstory and how she ended up in work are laid out more clearly. Her relationship with her parents was rocky from childhood. In the movie, Vivian reveals that when she was little, her mom used to lock her in the attic as punishment for misbehaving. To cope, she would imagine herself as a trapped princess waiting for a prince to rescue her. This whole speech was added to neatly wrap up her fairy tale arc in the movie. As a teenager, Vivian struggled with drugs but managed to quit when she was 14. She only made it to the 11th grade in school, and her life seemed to spiral from there. Vivian always had a tendency to be drawn to troubled men, letting romantic relationships dictate her life choices. Her mom even called her a bum magnet. After following bum number 3, as Vivian puts it, she ended up in Los Angeles with no money, no friends, and no real plan. She tried working regular low-paying jobs like at fast food places, but couldn't make enough to cover rent. The shame of her situation kept her from going back home, and eventually she met Kit, a streetwalker who became her friend and, in a way, her mentor and later roommate. Kit made prostitution seem like a viable option, and that's how Vivian found herself in this kind of world. The original version of Vivian is way harsher. It's mentioned that she started doing this kind of work since she was a teen, plus both she and Kit are suffering from a drug addiction. This is Vivian's introduction in the original script. Quote, Vivian is 22 years old. She has been hooking for over 6 years. Heavy makeup gives her pretty face a dangerous and hard look. She lights up a cigarette and takes a drag. She moves gracefully on
So this is the classic, the Disneyfied version versus the original version. Like you've seen it with the Little Mermaid, Pocahontas, a few other Sleeping Beauty, a few other stories where the books were a bit darker than the Disneyfied version of it. And then I think this creator stated that Disney bought the rights for this movie, so that changed the tone of the movie. So they're making a comparison of what Pretty Woman would have been, and Nora is a version of Pretty Woman. And I think times have changed, so we can discuss these subjects a bit more open than in the days of Pretty Woman.
spiked heels across the grime-covered sidewalk. She owns this section of the boulevard. After 6 years on the street, she has seen it all. She has done everything and will do anything. Humiliation is for the shy, fear is for the innocent. End quote. In the movie, Vivian is portrayed as a bit naive and inexperienced. She's not yet tainted like the others on the street, which is supposed to make her redeemable and sympathetic. This is how her description evolved in the later scripts. Quote, as we look closer, we see that she's young, 22 years old, and too pretty and healthy to have been on the street for long. Heavy makeup gives her face an older, harder look, but her bright eyes indicate that she's not quite as tough and confident as her street swagger makes her appear. End quote. In the movie, Vivian is carefully presented as an acceptable version of a sex worker. She's pretty, clean, and has a sweet personality with a bit of playful spice. She flosses her teeth, avoids drugs. She can also appreciate opera, making her someone who can easily blend into the world of the elite. Even Kit points out that Vivian never really belonged on the streets, as if all the other women and girls were born for this type of work.
Sure don't fit in down on the boulevard looking like you do. Not that you ever did. Well, thanks.
Unlike Kit and the other women, Vivian is portrayed as a princess worthy of being saved, a character the audience can root for without feeling uncomfortable. Annie, unlike Vivian, isn't presented as a sanitized version of a sex worker. She primarily works as a dancer at the club, but is open to doing other kinds of work on the side when the opportunity arises. She smokes, takes drugs, parties hard, and isn't afraid to swear or be loud and confrontational. Annie exists fully within her world. She doesn't distance herself from it, nor does the film try to make her seem like an exception. To some degree, Annie fits a certain stereotype, and some viewers might even feel there's not enough Anora in the movie called Anora. But she's far from a flat character. She doesn't make the best decisions. She's not supposed to be a perfectly good person, yet you still desperately want her to be happy in the end. The film doesn't judge her. Unlike Vivian, who effortlessly sheds her past and slips into high society, Annie carries the weight of her reality with her throughout the entire story, even when she steps into wealth and privilege.
So team, this is how you get stuff done. Step 1, download ClickUp. Step 2, you don't need a step 2.
There's no step 2?
No, ClickUp does everything.
Everything. I can share docs,
ClickUp,
tasks,
ClickUp,
calendars.
ClickUp.
Can I video
Both Vivian and Annie turn to sex work as a means of survival. It's not something they enjoy, but rather something they feel they have to do to get by. Vivian tells Edward that the first time she slept with a client, she cried, but eventually she got used to it. The moment Vivian and Annie are given a chance to leave their work behind, they take it without hesitation.
Cinderella.
Cinderella. Yes, Cinderella.
Nowadays, Pretty Woman is often seen as a movie that romanticizes this type of work. After all, one of its taglines was, "Who knew it was so much fun to be a hooker?" Not the best choice. You could take it as sarcasm, but only if the original ending had stayed. In that version, Edward and Vivian don't end up together. Instead, Edward drives Vivian back to her crappy apartment while she sobs loudly in the back seat. Frustrated by her crying, he physically drags her out of the car, throws the promised 3,000 at her, and drives off. Vivian uses the money to take Kit to Disneyland, but the final scene is far from happy. Quote, Kit smiles happily and looks back out the window. Vivian stares emptily ahead. End quote. Anora delivers a similar gut punch by the end when Annie is forced to divorce Vanya. Her presence dismissed as nothing more than an
The funniest thing is that's not how I remembered Pretty Woman, but it's pretty funny. I thought it was a love story at the end. But one thing I like the undertone love story between Anora and Vladimir. Vladimir? Was it Vladimir? or Eugene. I forgot, but this Russian guy.
Inconvenience to a powerful family. You can argue that the beginning of Anora carries a hint of romanticization as well. The world is chaotic, dangerous, and often brutal, but it's also vibrant, fast-paced, and at times thrilling. The romanticization in both movies isn't a bad thing. It serves a purpose. At their core, these stories aren't about the nitty-gritty details of prostitution. They simply have workers as their main characters. And in that regard, I think both films do a good job of highlighting how society treats women in this line of work. Both women are fully aware of the stigma surrounding their work and do their best not to let it define their self-worth. They joke about it, they try to own it, but when someone explicitly reduces them to a derogatory label, it still stings.
She's erotic dancer. Hi, Doris.
It's interesting to point out that Annie separates herself from the traditional prostitution and considers herself as an erotic dancer. It definitely highlights the hierarchy within the industry, how even the women involved judge and compete with one another based on how much they engage in or monetize. For Annie, this distinction might be a way to maintain a sense of control and dignity that the world tries to strip her of. Like many, she wants to believe she's not at the very bottom of this hierarchy. Surprisingly, Vivian seems to have more acceptance in this regard. Both movies lay out the harsh realities of what women in this line of work deal with, from judgment and discrimination to creepy clients and the constant threat of real danger.
Once you give me health insurance, workers' comp, and a 401k, then you can tell me when I work and not
Yeah,
work.
that
Right when
was
you were
funny.
introduced to
And
Vivian,
it was very strong-willed, right? So that was pretty good. Yeah. So I'd say there was an undertone with Igor Vladimir. I think that was the guy. So there were like two love stories going on.
sobering reality of her world hits. She walks past a crime scene. A woman working the streets was found dead in a dumpster. Later, Vivian is nearly assaulted by Edward's sleazy lawyer who thinks he is entitled to her just because of her job, reinforcing the unsettling reality that workers are often seen as public property, expected to always be available and compliant. Anora plays with that same fear. When Vanya's family discovers he married a stripper, his handlers or babysitters, basically those responsible for keeping him in check, arrive to assess the situation. Like a coward, Vanya abandons Annie without a word, while she is eventually tied up and gagged. While the scene
Yeah, but I think the movie was too harsh on Vanny because he's like a 21-year-old kid. He's not sure what he's doing. She's 24. I mean, obviously, even I don't think it was a class issue like the movie stated. I think if you're 21, 24, getting married, your parents are gonna get involved. There's gonna be conflicts on both sides of the coin, regardless of class or your profession or anything. I think 21, 24 is like a young age to get married. So I don't think the movie did a good job there or the conclusions that everyone's drawing from Vanya not being man enough. I mean, he's a 21-year-old kid with access to wealth and the ability to have as much fun as he wants, right?
scene carries a darkly comedic tone, the underlying threat is very real. You don't know what they're going to do to her, and neither does Annie. Throughout the film, Annie is constantly on edge, never fully certain of what might happen next. And because the movie doesn't follow her perspective, it's only when Annie finally breaks down at the end that you realize how scary and emotionally taxing this whole ordeal was for her. The way it's presented in both movies is very different. For Vivian, it starts as purely transactional, but as her connection with Edward deepens, it becomes emotional, both in the film and the original script. It's romantic, intimate, and pleasurable. Annie's experience, on the other hand, is entirely performative. The exaggerated sounds, the rehearsed movements, it's all part of an act. Her real self feels detached, like she's just going through the motions rather than experiencing any real intimacy. And this continues even after Annie and Vanya get married. You see Annie initiating their interaction, but it still doesn't feel entirely genuine. It gives her a sense of agency, a way to exert some control over Vanya in certain situations, and sometimes it serves as a distraction. One scene that illustrates this well is when Annie and Vanya are lying on the couch at home after
To understand Annie really in this movie, you have to look at her eyes. I think this movie was about the eyes. If you look at her eyes, I think her body and she's performing with her body and her mouth and her words, but her eyes really tell what she's really feeling. So you got to look at the eyes for Annie in this movie.
getting married. Annie, visibly anxious, starts asking if Vanya told his parents about their marriage.
Well, you did tell them, right?
She even tries to speak Russian, despite it being one of her insecurities, making her very vulnerable in the moment. When Vanya playfully teases her about her language skills and starts asking Annie about her family, Annie immediately shifts the conversation by initiating intimacy and returning to the fun stuff.
Are you making fun of me?
The intimacy could also be a way of maintaining the illusion of normalcy. I'll get into this more in a minute, but it's clear that Annie doesn't love Vanya and vice versa. However, as Sean Baker mentioned in interviews, Annie convinces herself she can learn to love him over time. She buys into the fantasy that they can somehow make it work. Essentially, she's playing up the girlfriend experience for Vanya. One particularly notable scene is when Annie tries to teach Vanya how to be intimate in a way that's actually good for both of them, not just Vanya. But in the end, Annie is the one doing all the work again, just like she's pleasuring a client. Later, it's clear that nothing has changed. Vanya falls right back into his old ways, oblivious to Annie's needs.
Ce que j'aime avec QuickBooks, c'est que lorsqu'on envoie une facture à un détaillant, ils reçoivent un courriel avec un PDF de la facture en pièces jointes et il y a un bouton payer. On a les fonds le jour d'après.
Anora definitely subverts the idea of the male savior or typical romantic lead. The moment you meet Vanya, it's clear this guy is trouble, or at the very least, just a clueless stoner. He's the complete opposite of what Edward represents
Yeah, I'd say clueless sooner. Plus, he's young. Edward's been around the block a few times, so I don't get the
Pretty
comparison
Woman.
there.
Edward is all high-end, elegance, charm, and the classic Prince Charming archetype. But in the original script, he was a pretty big asshole. Some moments even feel a little 50 Shades of Grey with how demanding, rude, and controlling he is. In the original script, Edward never actually breaks up with his girlfriend, so he's essentially having an affair with Vivian. Plus, it's not even his first time hiring an escort. He's also petty and stingy about money, always keeping track of how it's spent and on what. The movie softened a lot of those edges, and if it weren't for Richard Gere's natural charisma, Edward wouldn't have worked as a romantic lead. The electrifying chemistry between Richard Gere and Julia Roberts is the backbone of Pretty Woman. No matter how uncomfortable some moments might seem, their dynamic redeems it all. The tension between them builds naturally, and it works. You believe in it, you want them to end up together. It's obvious that Vivian is initially drawn to Edward's wealth and the luxury he offers, and she fully enjoys the experiences that come with it. But even if Edward weren't rich, I think their relationship could still work because at its core, it's a charming story of opposites attracting and bringing something new into each other's lives. Edward grounds Vivian by giving her a sense of safety, and not only in the financial sense. He shows her respect and gives her confidence to see herself as worthy of something more. By the end of the movie, Vivian is ready to take control of her own future. She leaves Edward, goes back to her tiny apartment with Kit, and starts packing for San Francisco, determined to start fresh.
I got things I can do, I used to make pretty good grades in high school.
And in a really touching moment, she tries to lift Kit up too, giving her some money and encouraging her to aim higher. It's like for the first time, Vivian actually believes in something better.
Think I got potential? Oh, yeah.
Vivian, on the flip side, shakes up Edward's rigid world. She teaches him how to let go and how to live in the moment, so they balance each other out. In the original script, Edward is such a dirtbag that it's no surprise when he decides to get rid of Vivian by the end, much like how Anora's story ultimately unfolds. I was shocked when I started reading interviews with Sean Baker and the actors because they kept talking about love, romance, and how charming Vanya is in the first 40 minutes, and how the betrayal comes out of nowhere. And I thought, did I watch the same movie? Because for me, the sobering reality of the situation was there from the very beginning. I really wanted Anora to trick me into believing that Annie and Vanya had some genuine feelings for each other, but it didn't. There is zero romantic love between them. They feel more like two stoner friends chasing a dopamine rush, throwing money around and enjoying each other's company. But that's where it ends. It's more about escapism for both of them. There's never a moment where you feel either of them truly cares about the other beyond the fun. Annie sees Vanya as an easy opportunity to improve her life. She's older, she understands how inexperienced he is in relationships, and she assumes it will be easy to control him, to put it bluntly.
You pay for an hour and there's still like 45 minutes left if you want to go again.
At times, she even takes on a motherly role. Vanya, on the other hand, is just a spoiled, carefree kid who doesn't think about anyone but himself. He doesn't even comprehend what people around him do for him on a daily basis. And he's not interested in Annie as a person, just as someone who can provide a service for him. From the moment he asks for her number and invites her to his house, well, to his dad's house, it's clear that sleeping with her is the main objective.
Bedrooms? Upstairs?
And when he proposes, it's not because of love, but because he sees a benefit for himself, a green card. It's such a stupid, impulsive reason, by the way, but it fits perfectly with his character. He's not the brightest. Annie, in turn, gets swept up in the experiences and the money Vanya can offer. And the film doesn't really paint this as a bad thing because in the end, they're both getting something out of it. They both know it's essentially a business deal. But the real tragedy is that Annie wants to believe in the fantasy. She needs to. And it's honestly painful to watch because when she's screaming about her and Vanya's love, you can tell she knows it's not real. Everybody around her knows it. You as a viewer know it. But it's like she's clinging.
Yeah, everyone knew it was not real. But I liked how she held it down. She was strong. I think she was thinking about the prenup and so I think she was kind of being realistic. I think she just wanted to be treated as a person. I think this was close to her Russian heritage as she would get. I think it's her father. In the movie, there's no claims about her father or mother, so on. So it was hard to believe, but she handled herself really well in these scenes. It was very funny. She was beating up the guys, and this guy, she broke his nose. It was pretty funny.
Cling to this desperate hope that if she says it enough times, maybe it will become true. Like if she commits to the lie hard enough, it will turn into something real. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking.
I love my husband and I plan on being with him forever.
Many viewers frame Annie as the victim of a huge betrayal, but it's not that simple. What happens to her is awful. The treatment she gets is horrible, and you sympathize with her, but calling it a betrayal suggests that there was real trust or love to begin with, and there wasn't. Annie simply messed up. She bet everything on something she knew wasn't real and lost. Her breakdown in the car at the end is her grieving. In the script, these realizations from both Annie and Vanya are much more apparent. When Vanya is finally found by the whole gang after running away and leaving Annie behind, he outright tells her that this marriage was a bad idea. Quote, Annie doesn't know if Ivan is serious, but she knows there's truth in his statement. End quote. But the most interesting part for me comes even before that, when Annie and drunk Vanya are talking in her club and she refers to him in third person. I'm assuming this is not a typo. Ivan, what do you want me to do? There's nothing I can do. Annie, what? What do you mean? I want to stay married to Ivan, don't you? Ivan, do we have to talk about this now? This moment says so much about Annie's mindset. She's not addressing the real Vanya sitting in front of her. She's talking about the idea of Ivan, the version she wants him to be, the one she believes could give her the life she wants. It's obvious that Annie isn't clinging to love. She's clinging to her ticket out. She knows this marriage is her chance to escape her circumstances. And to some extent, she was initially smart about it. She's aware that she didn't sign a prenup, meaning she was hoping to secure something for herself if things went south. But she doesn't realize just how much power Vanya's family has. Her belief that meeting them in person will change everything is so naive and desperate. When Annie meets Vanya's mother, she introduces herself as Anora.
I think any mother would have this power over a 21-year-old. I don't think it has to do with rich and social class, but that's just my view on
A name she otherwise seems to want to move away from.
Меня зовут Anora.
There are a few layers to why she makes this choice. First, it's a formal setting, and in Russian culture, using full names is considered more respectful and appropriate, just like how Vanya is short for Ivan. But beyond that, Annie is a persona, the version of her that dances for money and hustles to survive. By using Anora, Annie's trying to present herself as someone different, someone worthy of being taken seriously. And it becomes contradictory. She's trying to get closer to the family, but at the same time, she's putting up a wall. Anora is just another side of her, one she's choosing to show now. But is it any more real than Annie? Nobody really knows who Anora is, because just like Annie, she's also a performance, just a different kind.
And you're not part of this family.
When Annie realizes that being nice won't get her anywhere, she falls back on her louder basic persona as a defense mechanism, swearing at Vanya and his family.
Now your family's trash.
In that moment, it's satisfying to watch, and it feels like she's standing up for herself, but the toughness doesn't come from a place of empowerment. It's not the yes girl, show them moment. The anger she's throwing around isn't really about them. It's about her own disappointment in herself for buying into a fantasy that was never going to work.
and these ads.
Both movies feature male characters who serve as key helpers in the protagonist's journeys. For Annie, it's Igor, and for Vivian, it's the hotel manager Barney Thompson. There's not much to say about Barney, as he has a straightforward role, helping Vivian with shopping, teaching her etiquette, and offering advice on how to navigate the world she's stepping into. His unconditional kindness and guidance are very important to Vivian's transformation and help her see that she's worthy of respect and love. Igor, however, is a more fascinating character because his motivations are more layered. First of all, Igor is just as confused as Annie. It's literally his first day on the job or something like that, and he has no idea what's going on. Like Annie, he doesn't really know Vanya or his family, so she becomes the only relatable person in this whole chaotic mess. Secondly, Igor and Annie come from the same background. Both are working-class immigrants trying to make it work. Because of this, he likely feels a sense of solidarity with her and even sees himself in her. The difference is that Igor is older, in his early 30s, and has seen more of the world. He becomes almost a stand-in for the audience, watching Annie's situation unfold and feeling sorry for her. And like Barney in Pretty Woman, he just seems to be a genuinely kind person, though you wouldn't guess it at first due to his Russian resting bitch face. In a way, he fits the classic tough on the outside, soft on the inside stereotype. Annie hates absolutely everything about Igor.
Yeah, Igor. Yeah, but I understand how it was traumatic for Annie. I think overall the acting, the motion, cinema, the direction of the camera, the focus on the eyes. I think overall it was a good movie though. I think what was surprising, the scarf that was used to keep her mouth shut became something to keep her warm. And then the clothes actually belonged to his mother. So it was kind of interesting. I probably have to do a deeper analysis into the meanings behind the symbolism of the clothes, right?
Their first meeting is awful. He physically restrains her, ties her up, and understandably freaks her out. But even after Igor tries to apologize and show her kindness, she keeps pushing him away, calling him names and making assumptions about him, like assuming he's a drug dealer or a gopnik. Annie judges Igor the same way people judge her. The most obvious theory for her hostility is that Annie simply doesn't know how to handle kindness, especially from men. Almost all her relationships are transactional, so when Igor comes along and tries to comfort her and help her without expecting something in return, she just doesn't know how to handle it. That's why in the end, when Igor gives Annie back her wedding ring, the one that was forcibly taken from her, she decides to thank him the only way she knows how, by offering sex. It's a simple and somewhat predictable arc for Annie's character, but I think there's more to why she can't stand Igor. Annie might resent.
Yeah, so when Igor, so she was performing as well. But then when Igor looked into her eyes and was looking for a kiss, she broke down. Just explaining the ordeal, what she went through, but she still came out well. She got the ring. I think the ring was worth 15K, and then she got a next 10 to 15K. So she came out well with 30K. And then the guy gave her 15K for a week and then all these expenses. So she came out well. I know the movie's not about money, but she came out well like a 50K.
Igor because he reminds her of where she comes from. Deep down, she wants to believe she's different, that she's destined for something better. Unlike Vivian in Pretty Woman, Annie doesn't really
Stay with the jet. Also on the private jet, you saw the class where the rich family was up at the front, the helper was in the middle, and then Igor and the other lower class were on the back. Well, Annie and Igor.
struggle with self-worth. If anything, she has some sense of entitlement. Meanwhile, Igor follows orders and he seems content with his place in the world, and Annie sees it as pathetic.
Мне кажется, было бы правильно, чтобы Иван извинился.
And finally, Igor basically becomes a punching bag for Annie. She channels all her frustration and disappointment onto him because he's the only one who's taken it, literally. And this is her way of feeling power in a very powerless moment in her life. It felt like the last 20 minutes of Anora dragged on a bit too much for me. There were multiple moments where I thought the movie was about to end, but then it just kept going. And the final stretch, especially the scenes between Anora and Igor, felt strange. I really hoped they wouldn't take their relationship in a sexual or romantic direction because at that point, it just felt unnecessary. I wanted to understand more about Anora or Annie, but instead the focus was shifting to her relationship with yet another guy. That said, the ending is also what makes Igor more interesting and less of a stereotype. He was the one character who genuinely surprised me. In the original script, when Annie gets on top of Igor, he's visibly confused and concerned. But less things happen until Annie suddenly starts hitting him. At that point, he reacts by restraining her and shouting at her to stop, and then he holds her as she cries. The movie version changed this ending slightly, and probably for the better because it brings out more depth in both characters. In the final cut, Igor is still confused and hesitant at first, but instead of just letting things happen, he actually reciprocates. He tries to kiss Annie, which shifts the dynamic. There is suddenly resistance, and that's when Annie starts punching him before breaking down completely. The way Igor behaves in this moment does suggest that he has some level of desire for Annie, which makes Annie's suspicions feel at least somewhat justified. Aren't all men the same? Just kidding. I wouldn't say this was Igor's main motive or that he had some big plan and was hitting on Annie throughout the film. He doesn't show any signs of pursuing her romantically. When he gives Annie the ring back, it's a gesture of kindness, not an attempt to get something in return. He could have easily kept it for himself, but he didn't. The way things unfold at the end is tragic because Annie is not in love with Igor, and what happens between them is far from romantic. It almost feels like Annie's last walk of shame.
Est-ce que tu rêves de pouvoir voyager
Yeah, the last walk of shame. I don't know if I agree, but I get where she's coming from.
partout dans le monde ou simplement de vivre exactement là où tu en as envie sans aucune contrainte? Salut.
Both Pretty Woman and Anora explore wealth and class, but a bit differently. Pretty Woman is essentially a celebration of consumerism and capitalism, where material things like luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, and designer clothing are presented as the key to happiness. In this world, wealth is equated with respect and status. Having more means you get treated better. The movie portrays money as the ultimate goal, something everyone should strive for. It's presented as the key to freedom, security, and the solution to all problems. In the movie, Vivian gets an offer that most people wouldn't turn down. The kind of deal Annie desperately wanted to get by the end. Edward offers her an apartment, a car, and financial security, essentially keeping her as his mistress. However, to make Vivian more likable, the film has her decline Edward's offer. She doesn't want the money, she wants love.
The question is how much more?
I want the fairy tale.
And if Edward can't give her that, she's okay with taking the agreed upon own money and leaving. She's already made up her mind to go to San Francisco and finish school. But Vivian definitely enjoys the wealth and power that comes with it. As Kid puts it, she got cleaned up real nice.
It's easy to clean up when you got money. Yeah.
What's interesting is how quickly Vivian embraces this power. In one scene, she casually tells a store clerk to hand over his tie just because she likes it. Only a week ago, she was in the service industry herself, yet she doesn't hesitate to treat a worker this way. It's played for comedy, of course, but it raises the question of how easily money can change a person and whether Vivian might start to abuse her newfound privilege. In the original script, Vivian never gets such an enticing offer because this version of Edward isn't exactly Prince Charming. Still, she hopes he will ask her to stay. In the end, the only kind gesture he makes is offering to drive her home. The script hints multiple times at how Vivian struggles to let go of the material world she got a taste of. Just like in Anora, Edward gives her a fur coat, but it's not truly hers. He only rents it, and when their time together is up, she has to give it back. Quote, Vivian pulls the fur from the hanger. From her eyes, we can tell that it's going to be very difficult for her to part with it. End quote. On the way to her apartment, Edward shows Vivian a magazine with his pretty
Oh yeah, if Annie never gave away those clothes, she would have been up a lot more. That was an expensive jacket too. I liked how she threw it on the guy. But he was a kid in the whole ordeal, right? So
girlfriend on the cover, and they stop at the store to return the fur. This is when Vivian breaks down in the back seat, realizing that she will never truly belong to this world of luxury. Just like Annie and Anora, even though Vivian believed there might be love, she whispers I love you to Edward as he sleeps, she knows that this love is tied to the life Edward leads. This version of Edward, as I've said before, has a shitty personality. If Edward hasn't been rich, it would have been a different story. Quote, she knows only too well that his reply would not be I love you too. There's nothing she can offer this man, nothing that would hold him. Yet there is an emptiness inside her this night that she cannot bear. End quote. Annie becomes comfortable with wealth much more quickly than Vivian, and in many ways more carelessly. Quote, Annie moves into the mansion. She places a few picture frames in the bedroom, one of her with her sister and mother, another with Lulu and friends. She fills the bathroom with her products and the closet with her clothes. She quickly becomes very comfortable in her new home. Annie admires Ivan's mother's closet. It's huge and is lined with designer clothes, shoes, and handbags. She sees a designer eye mask. End quote.
Will you miss me or my money back?
Call your money back.
While Vivian in both the movie and the script seems to understand the value of money and is hesitant to take more than she believes she deserves, Annie quickly embraces the luxury around her without questioning its origins, treating Vanya's family's wealth as though it's hers, which is a bit odd given that she should also know what it takes to earn it. When Vanya proposes, Annie's first thought is about the size of the ring. After they marry, she fully embraces her new status as his wife, often reminding people of her position.
I am Yvonne's f***ing wife!
Annie's attitude toward wealth shows her as someone who is easily seduced by power and materialism. Anora portrays money and wealth as a cursed object. By the end,
I think that's a fair point.
after being pulled into the chaos of Vanya's family, Annie seems so exhausted and disillusioned that she's finally ready to let go. Her decision to give away the fur coat, for example, feels like a rejection of everything she thought she wanted, but she still feels sorry that it's over. Quote, Annie takes a shower. When she's drying off, she looks around the gorgeous bathroom. Nice while it lasted. End quote. In the end, Annie walks away with, I believe, $25,000 and her wedding ring. Technically a win,
Oh,
but it doesn't feel like it changed
25,000,
anything.
okay.
She doesn't get a dream ending or a clear way out. You can almost see her going back to work the next morning, though it probably would be too embarrassing, because her time with Vanya wasn't some life-altering experience. It was a harsh wake-up call that if she ever tries to reach higher, the world will
Nah,
drag her
man,
back down.
she could go to college and stuff with that. That was a good win. Yeah, follow this content creator. That's it for me. I'll do another review. But I thought that was a good review. I liked how they compared Pretty Woman to Anora. All right, guys.